Welcome to the Sunset Chat. The president of Bank Street College.
So soft, you'll think you're sleeping on a cloud. And if you need anything very quick, just ring this bell. One of my servants will scurry over, quick as a link.
The next morning, after a hearty breakfast at the mile-long banquet table, the stranger began putting on beat-up boots and a little cap.
Oh, leaving already, friend? And we were having such a good time. Ah, well.
We will be starting in a few minutes. We're just letting more people enter the room. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Gutierrez, and I am the new Alumni Relations Director at Bank Street. Welcome to the 2020 Sunset Chat. For those of you who are new to this event, or if this is your first alumni event, I would like to welcome you back home to Bank Street. If this is not your first alumni event, then I would like to give you a special thanks for your continued support. For those of you who have attended previous Sunset Chats, you know that this event is hosted in person and usually at the ICC on the 14th floor, where from my understanding, you're able to enjoy an actual sunset and that there's an amazing view from that space. Unfortunately, as you know, we cannot be here in person. However, tonight's discussion will still be as exciting and informative, and I'm sure everybody will enjoy it. Before I continue, I just want to provide a few housekeeping items. If you could take a moment to rename or the name that appears on your screen, just to make sure that it is your full name. I know sometimes we have a different computer or share different accounts, and it may say a different item than your respective name. Also, if you could take some time and type in the chat box your full name, the year that you graduated, and the program that you participated in. I think it's just a nice way for us to just quickly see if we recognize any of our fellow alumni, fellow peers.
Also, if you're teaching or working as a leader now, I'm curious what context you're working in, whether you're doing it remotely or in person or both. That would be a nice thing to add.
Thank you, Shael. So for myself, I'm really excited to be part of the Bank Street family. As I mentioned, I am new to Bank Street, and I am really thrilled to be participating in tonight's event. I really think this is a great opportunity for our alumni to hear directly from our president, and for our president to hear from the voices of our alumni, especially that our president is an alumnus himself. I also want to take a few minutes to just quickly touch upon different ways that our alumni can really engage with Bank Street and with different departments. One way is for alumni to share your story, to really share with us all the accomplishments, whether it's professional or personal accomplishments with us. We know our alumni are doing amazing things, just unfortunately, sometimes we're just not aware of it. So if you are passionate about something and you would love us to know, or you would like your peers to know, please share that. And a little bit later, I'll provide a link where you can directly provide some of that accomplishments on a forum. Other ways that you can get involved is by volunteering. One of the main areas that you can volunteer is with our admissions office. They love it when our alumni can participate and especially promote Bank Street, especially that what other way or the most genuine way that prospective students can really hear about how great of a program or great the graduate school is, just from hearing it directly from alumni, from their stories. So if you're interested in participating or volunteering with the admissions office, please let me know, or any member of the Alumni Relations office. Other ways to get involved is on our advisory board for the Bank Street Alumni Association. We have amazing volunteers who really give their time and wisdom and really talk to our office and really share ideas of ways that we can improve some of our alumni engagement opportunities, not only for our alumni in the tri-state area, but also alumni across the country and globally. These are just a few ways to get involved. There are many other ways. I would love to speak with many of you in the near future, and just if there's any feedback that you have or anything that you would like to talk about, please feel free to reach out, especially for those alumni who don't live in the tri-state area or in New York City. We are really looking for ways to engage our alumni across the country as well. Now, with this program itself, we are going to provide a question and answer session after our president's discussion, just to give you an opportunity to really submit questions or directly to the president. If you are going to submit questions in the chat box, my team and I will be looking at these questions, gathering them, and ideally, hopefully have our presidents answer all of these questions. If not all of them, then the majority of them, given the time that we do have. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you our 8th president of Bank Street of Education, President Shael Polakow-Suransky.
Thank you, Eric. It's so wonderful, everyone, to see you here this evening. And I wish we could be in person, but it's also nice to see folks from around the country who are able to join in this context. So, you know, it's one of the advantages of this moment is that we are able to see each other in ways that we might not otherwise when we are working in person. So I'm going to talk for a little while, but as true to our Bank Street tradition, I want to have some dialogue and some back and forth and some conversation. So I'll probably talk for 15 minutes and then kind of open it up for some conversation. And you can either sort of ask questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and say your questions. Both are fine because our group isn't that large tonight. So let me just start with a couple words on what Bank Street's up to these days. And then I'm gonna take a few minutes to touch on our recent election and what's happening more broadly in schools around the city and around the country in this COVID context, and some ideas I have about what might be next. So, you know, Bank Street over the past 5 years, a big element of our work has been trying to figure out how do we make what is a wonderful and powerful instructional model something that's much more broadly used in public schools and public school systems around the country. And so we've put a lot of our energies into creating relationships here in New York City and with other school districts to help with that goal. And we've also worked really hard to open up our graduate school so that it's more accessible to a much broader range of students in both the city and the country. So I'll give you a few quick examples of that, and happy to talk more about any of these as we go on in the evening. One is we have several programs that are funded by either public funds or foundations to train educators that are new and sort of resonate with historic programs at Bank Street, but are specifically designed in this moment. So, for example, the graduate faculty created an early childhood degree over the past couple of years for working teachers here in New York City, working in early childhood programs who are not licensed by the state. And the state has kind of upped the standards of what you need to be a teacher in early childhood, and many great people are far from having met those standards. And so we created something that was mastery based in the sense that we wanted to design it so that we could take advantage of the strengths and knowledge those teachers bring to the table, and also create something that was sort of less traditional in terms of courses that follow a particular sequence, and rather kind of adapting to the next steps of those in the program. We also recently started a TSOLVE, a training program for teachers working with ESL students. That's a residency program where teachers are funded to work in public schools and get a salary while they're doing their student teaching for that year, which is part of a larger effort on our part to kind of push teacher ed programs and states and cities around the country to use residencies as sort of the norm as opposed to the exception, so that there's really time for teachers to practice and have structured opportunities for support and reflection as they're becoming teachers. And we've also started to get involved in trying to figure out, well, as our teachers go out into the world, as our leaders go out into the world, what's getting in the way of doing strong progressive work? And there are so many policies out there that actually work against our deep beliefs about teaching and learning and need to be changed. And those, you know, come in many different forms. They sometimes are policies with a small p, and, you know, the way a school or a school district is interpreting something sometimes is a federal law. And so the work around teacher residencies is an example of that, in the sense that most teachers in this country, as they're trained, get less than a couple months of practice in a classroom before they have to teach. And that time has been shrinking over the past 2 decades. And a big reason for that is that no one has built into the system an expectation that teachers would get a year of practice and that they would have financial support while they're doing that practice in order to live. And so it doesn't happen. And it's not expensive, actually, when you think about it in the larger scope of things, but it is actually much more than what most school systems and what most public agencies pay for teacher training. And so trying to shift that has been a big goal of ours. Another example is in the birth to 3 space. You know, this is an area where there are no requirements for teachers in most states. And so going along with that, there's also very, very low pay. Teachers who are working with infants and toddlers usually make below the poverty line. Many of them are on public assistance and food stamps. And what we know from our experience and the emerging research in neuroscience is that's actually the age where the most critical development happens in terms of our brains. And so as a country, we're sort of allowing educational inequality to be baked into our schools before kids even start school, because there's no system of support for children and families. And so we've been working to push the idea that teachers need to be compensated in a real way, similar to the way K-12 teachers are paid. And there actually needs to be a structured learning experience and practice for teachers in that space. A third example I'll give you is, we've been working with a network that we helped to build together with Linda Darling-Hammond at the Learning Policy Institute to create a network amongst progressive teacher education institutions around the country. And there are now about 20 institutions involved, and it's called Ed Prep Lab. And the focus is on deeper learning and equity and trying to build teacher and leader education programs that support those principles. And it's both an opportunity for teacher and leader educators to learn from each other and to share what they're doing in some of the stronger programs around the country, and a chance to push on policy issues that constrain them. So I share those as examples. There are many more interesting things happening, and happy to talk about those as well. But they sort of speak to a belief that Bank Street has something important to offer the world, and the world also needs to change when it comes to how schools are run, if good education is going to become the norm. So let me shift a bit from that. Just say a couple thoughts on the election, because I know that's been on all of our minds over the last couple of weeks, and it's been a roller coaster ride, and seems to be that we're coming to the end of it, hopefully. But one of the things that we've been talking a lot about at Bank Street during the last 4 years is the way racism has sort of become normalized, in a way that felt different to a lot of folks in our community. And I think that it's definitely true that our current president is a white supremacist and has promoted actively, a very racist agenda politically in his policies. And it's also true that in many ways it's not so new. The work that we've seen coming out of the Trump administration. It may be less polished, but in many ways this is a return and making visible a set of beliefs and values that is very much a part of this country and has been for a long time. And for folks, who are students and faculty, staff members in our community, as we talk about these things, part of what we're also working on is, how do we make Bank Street a place that's actually working to change and build an anti-racist organization? Because like any institution within this country, it's not an easy place to be if you're a person of color. There's constant situations that our students and staff have dealt with over the years, from microaggressions to real aggressions that have dehumanized them and have made them feel unwelcome and unsafe. And so part of our work is also about that, and trying to sort of strengthen our community and build a racial consciousness. And with that in mind, I wanted to share an interesting video that actually precedes the election, from Eddie Glaude, who was speaking over a year ago. He's the head of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton, and he had a segment on MSNBC, August 2019, and it was recently recirculated, and I saw it for the first time, and I think it's a really speaks powerfully to this moment. So give me a second, I'm going to try and navigate sharing my screen. So hang on just one second.
America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them. And the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, a 2-year-old had his bones broken by 2 parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicole, Or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
What else?
Lord help us.
Tide Pods Ultra Oxy one-ups the cleaning power of liquid.
Can a one-up spaghetti night?
It sure can.
Really?
I think that's a powerful statement to reflect on in this moment, and connects to the work I was just talking about we've been doing internally. It's also work we're beginning to do externally. A few years ago, we started a center called the Center for Culture, Race, and Equity that works with schools and childcare centers to connect, work that folks are doing at an individual level to work that they need to do at an institutional level. And we're proud of that. And we're also cognizant of the fact that, these issues are all intertwined. And, as you work to support teachers or work to support schools, you have to pay attention to the identity of those who are making decisions and those who are living in those institutions, and those who are served by those institutions. So shifting now away a bit from our sort of larger work to just some words on what we're doing amidst COVID. So as you may know, we in March, like most institutions, went remote. And so our graduate school is still working remotely. And that is a big challenge. It's not easy to transition all this work that is so deeply linked to relationships into a remote context, but our faculty has been doing really thoughtful, interesting work on just that question prior to COVID. And so we had a lot of experience to draw on from the previous 5 years as we've been exploring online master's programs. And so I think what we're doing is quite strong, actually. And we're learning a lot. And our children's programs have been meeting in person since August. And so we have about 400 children in the building. And our Head Start is also running on the Lower East Side. And I am very proud of how that's working. And I think it actually has relevance to some of the big questions today in the broader space in terms of what's possible in the COVID context. We found a lab near to New York City that was willing to test our students and our staff and run the cost of it through insurance. And so everyone from age 1 on up gets tested twice a week at Bank Street. And that is a powerful safety measure because it means, we catch cases before folks are contagious, at least so far. And we've had 8 cases in the community, all of them very early, and no one's gotten sick as a result of coming to Bank Street. And we are running a full program 5 days a week and able to provide a really rich, though different, learning experience for children. And as I look around the country at how rare that experience is right now, there's a devastation occurring, honestly. I think we've lost millions of kids over these past 7-8 months from school, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of them back once this ends, but it may not end anytime soon. The vaccine for adults is now entering a phase where people can start to access it in the coming 6 to 8 months, but there hasn't been any vaccine testing done on children yet. And so it's very likely that next school year, we're gonna have similar challenges in terms of running school. And there's been a lot of debate about whether or not it's safe, made worse by politicians who are kind of making it into a political football. Truth is, like, most teachers and parents don't feel safe with the safety measures most schools have been able to set up, and most of them aren't coming, and many cities have just decided not to offer school in this context and just do it fully remote. And while you can do some stuff, particularly for kids living in poverty, access to the technology, the devices, and so on are not easy. And even if you do have that, the quality of the learning is not very good. And so there's a level of disengagement and disenfranchisement that's happening in schools that I think is really devastating. And I think, there is a path out of this while we're in COVID. And I am, really angry that our public officials have not built that, because it's eminently doable. It's not easy and it's not cheap, but it's definitely doable. And so that's another area where I think we're increasingly interested in trying to make a case that we're in a real crisis right now, and it's not going away soon, and we need to act. And so happy to dig into more on that too as well. So let me stop. I've been talking for 20 minutes, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Bill, for noting the victory in Portland around early childhood. That is a great example of what we need more of. And what's so powerful, if you haven't read about it, is that they tied an expansion of access to equal compensation for early childhood educators. And so folks will see their salaries more than double those who are working with 3- and 4-year-olds as this program expands. And that's one of the big mistakes New York City made as it expanded, is that was not part of the model until just last year. Compensation started to be addressed. And you're right, Eddie's book on James Baldwin is very good. So that might be one to read. It just came out. So you could write something in the chat, a comment, a reaction, or unmute yourself and ask a question or raise your hand.
Shael, I do see a question here. Someone's asking, how is Bank Street prepared to operate if the COVID vaccine takes a long time to be administered?
So as I said, I think we're probably dealing with another year at least, if not longer, where we have to deal with safety issues related to being inside. So that means the kinds of things you need to do to operate an educational institution inside is, one, you need to be testing regularly to make sure that you catch any cases that are coming in from outside the building. And that is outside the capacity of most institutions to do on their own. We got lucky, and we're also really kind of dogged about trying to build a solution around this, but it's rare what we've been able to create. But it shouldn't be rare. The technology exists to do this, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and it should be available to any school at this point, and it's a matter of federal investment to make that true. And I think once you do that, the risks go down dramatically, but there are other things you have to do as well. You need to make sure that there's good ventilation. This is an airborne disease. It's not something that you're likely to get by touching a pencil, which is where a lot of the investments have been, around cleaning surfaces. It's something you're likely to get because you're in a room talking for an extended period of time and someone is sick who's in that room with you. And so no screening procedure with testing is going to be perfect. Some people are going to come into the building and are going to be infectious potentially. And so you have to make sure either that you have the windows open and you're getting sort of air circulation that way. Ideally, you know, if you have a ventilation system, you have to upgrade it so that you have good air filtration happening. And you probably need local air purification in each classroom. And when you combine those three things, you can get about 6 air exchanges an hour, which is what sort of the historical requirement for hospitals has been. And that is enough to significantly reduce the risk. And then, you know, the next step is everyone needs to be wearing masks, which is not the norm in most schools that are open right now, unfortunately. And you need to have smaller groups, because the larger the group, while social distancing may not actually be the meaningful thing in the sense that, one, it's not realistic to keep kids 6 feet apart from each other in a classroom, but two, like with aerosols, you can get infected from 10 feet or 12 feet away. And so the reason to have smaller groups is to have fewer people in the room at once, which reduces the risk. And if you can do those things, which are not simple things, you can do it safely, I think. That's what we're finding so far. And you know, I think a lot of universities have come to similar conclusions, and they're pretty wealthy, and so they're able to do it. Our public systems have not even really tried to do these things in a systematic way. And New York City is a good example of a city that actually has opened for some in-person learning, which is an accomplishment, but the complexity of dealing with the safety measures means that most of the time, most kids are not getting in-person learning. And it's not, at this point, I wouldn't say, something that's working for kids, families, or teachers. So I think there are definitely better ways to do this if there's public investment, and if we say this is a priority, which I think, you know, for both the children and families, it's critical that it be one in this next year and a half.
This next question is from Marion Howard. She says, sounds terrific. How is your child? So glad we are holding on to a whole year in the classroom for our grad students. What are we doing about climate change?
Good question, Marion. We're not doing anything robust on climate change other than sort of teaching about it in our curriculum. But I think you are a powerful voice on this issue, and you're right to bring it to the fore. But I can't claim that we have accomplishments in that area yet. I see a question from Hal. Bank Street has spent about 4 to 5 years in a deep dive into the institution's understanding of racial literacy. Can you share what you've learned and how things have shifted or changed as a result of this effort? Well, I would say we're at the beginning of this work, even though we've been involved in it for several years now. One thing I've learned is that this is a conversation that has to operate both in terms of sort of reflection and building our respective racial consciousness, understanding our own identities and being aware of how those play out in our interactions with colleagues and students. And if it stays purely at the reflection phase of the work, it's often disappointing, and that there's actually a need for action as well. And action doesn't have to be big action. It can be changing how you think about a particular child that you're working with, or how you interact with someone that you see every day in the elevator. But it can also be institutional change. One of the changes we've made is we've created an office focused on equity and anti-racist work. It's led by Aquila Rosado. And what she's trying to do is build across the different parts of Bank Street. You know, I've mentioned that this work is happening, but it happens really differently in the School for Children as it does in the graduate school. It happens really differently in our public impact focused parts of the organization that are working with teachers and schools than it does in our Head Start. So each part of the organization is working on this, but I think thus far they've been quite separate from one another. And part of what we want to do is learn from each other and build off of some of that work so that it spreads more and is also more integrated in the sense that it's happening across each of our divisions.
Thank you, Shael. We have another question here from Arlene Leshak. Does Bank Street have a position on who should be the next Secretary of Education?
That's a good question. You know, I think the president said he wants someone who's been a teacher, so that's good. And, you know, I don't think that...
Excuse me, Shael, I already nominated you.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
But I think you want also someone who understands how to make change in policy institutions. It's not easy. And there's a lot of distance between the federal education secretary and folks working in schools. And so trying to figure out how you do something useful from that position is not a simple task. I do think Biden's education platform is strong in many ways. I've been impressed with the thoughtful qualities of it, and you know, we've worked to try and influence it where we can, particularly around early childhood and teacher education. So we'll see. You know, I don't have a name to give you though tonight.
Thanks, Shael. Another question here from Tracy. Hi, Shael. Your knowledge of the New York City Department of Education is extremely vast. Have you been able to share what Bank Street is doing regarding racial equity and teaching and learning in a pandemic? If so, has there been any traction?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing work. We have a lot of partnerships with the DOE. They also have taken on a lot of work around racial equity in the past couple years. And we've partnered in some cases with them on that. And we just got a grant to start some work in District 17 and 18 in Brooklyn with middle school and math education. And that's, you know, whenever we enter into an instructional partnership, we bring racial equity lens to the table as part of that work. And we've done the same in some of the partnerships around early childhood. In terms of learning in the pandemic, you know, we are talking with the DOE and the state about trying to help teachers who are kind of planning day to day at this moment in many contexts as they teach remotely. Some of them now have remote groups as high as 50 students because of the deal that the mayor and the UFT struck, that, you know, the staff who work remotely have to be separate from the staff that work in person. And so there's huge class sizes on the remote side. You know, so the thing that's needed is people need a chance to reflect on how this is a really different context to teach and to adapt their practice. And they need a space in which to do that reflection with sort of smart colleagues. And there's been very, very, very little support so far. I'd say our teachers in the School for Children are learning some interesting things, and so have our graduate faculty about how to do this well. Usually it comes back to what we do when we're in person though, which is build relationships and figure out ways to make the work sort of authentic and hands-on. And in some ways, you know, both of those are harder in a remote context.
Shael, I have a question here from Virginia Abrams. She says that my son is the head of a very small private school, grades 6 to 12 in Boston, with a very Bank Street orientation. A concern we have shared is how to help the students feel they can make a difference in their communities and not experience despair. Do you have anything to note about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think adolescents are fascinated with social change in my experience as a teacher and as a principal. And you know, I see that as some of the most resonant work that we end up doing with our middle school kids at Bank Street. We just finished a mock election where there were candidates who ran to be president parallel to the US election. And you know, those types of simulations are really powerful ways to create emotional memories for young people and also give them kind of hands-on lived experiences that get them interested in facets of politics and social change. And I also think, you know, where there's real work, you know, kids get more engaged. And so to the extent that teachers are designing curriculum that allow kids to actually work on real problems in the world, that's very exciting and empowering.
I think Hal may have another question. Hal, do you have another question from?
Yeah, let me just say it. I'm typing it. My local community in Yorktown, New York, has a Yorktown for Social Justice effort. And part of that effort is developing task force, including a task force with the local school, Yorktown Public Schools, a K-12 revision to the curriculum with a social justice core. Is Bank Street, is anyone at Bank Street available to help with efforts like that? It's happening a lot in the Westchester schools, but I would love to see Bank Street and you know, someone from Bank Street or people from Bank Street to possibly offer an ear and perhaps something more substantial than that, if it's at all possible. Do you know if there's any effort to spread the word?
We do have, we have some partnerships with those school districts training principals, and we've done some professional development work around racial justice in some of those districts. So I think, yeah, definitely worth making a connection and to see exactly what it is that they're interested in. But yeah, that is something we're good at. I think we have a lot of folks who, as you know, come out of schools and have done really powerful work as teachers and leaders and are really interested in staying connected to schools. I'm curious if there are other questions, like what you all are seeing out there right now in schools. What's it like? What are the challenges? What's working, what's not? Or in higher ed contexts.
Well, I'll just point out something that has been quite remarkable up here is the community gathered graduates of the local high school and had them tell their stories. You know, they're very successful people now. They're out there in colleges, they're doing very well, and they reflect on their K-12 experience. And the stories have been up on the local television for the last month, describing the behavior of some teachers that offended them horrifically, the child-to-child interactions that occurred in their lifetime. And those are some of the most, I mean, I've watched it over and over and over again. It's the most revealing, honest, helpful, sad to hear, but important to hear commentary I've ever seen and heard. And I'm grateful that the community is doing that. I think there's some resistance to hearing it, however. And that's why there's a task force to explore where do you go from here.
Great, thank you for sharing that.
I can speak to, hi Shael, hi Bank Street family. I can speak to the experience that my nieces and nephews are having, who are New York City public school students, and they're all working remotely right now. And I've known this, but what I'm actually seeing with my nephew in particular, who is 8 years old, is he's made tremendous gains since we've gone remote. And a lot of that has to do with the synchronous teaching. So he's in an ICT class. He was able to loop with his third grade teachers last year. And when I tell you they're so involved with the family and checking in and just making sure that he is on task, and he's actually doing better remotely. He's the child who just had some challenges sitting still, and and he's doing so much better with the breaks during the day, and he's thriving. My niece is her first year in high school, which she did not want to start off this way, but she was so proud to send me her first marking period report card, and she's thriving. And coming from middle school where she had some challenges, thriving. So I'm seeing that where it works, and a lot of it has to do with what you said with that relationship building. Having been in a rec site supervisor this summer, a lot of it had to come down to relationship building, and there's nothing harder for me than telling a 3-year-old, sweetie, I need you to put your mask on. Because that's just it's not natural for a 48-year-old to have a mask on 8 hours a day. So for a 3-year-old, that was challenging. So, but it was about the relationships with both the students and the staff. What I see professionally is different from what my niece and nephews are experiencing.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that for some children, this actually does work better. Because they're able to focus more and they also have more freedom. And that, school can be very distracting and also very confining in the way it works for many children. And so having a different context that is more open and gives the child in some ways more control over their body and over their time can work if there's a sustained engagement that's able to be built. That's the key though. And for many kids that's not happened, and they're just not in school at all right now. There's a report done by looking at an estimate nationally that there are 3 million children that have just essentially stopped going to school at all over the past 6 months. Which is devastating.
Shael, I have a question here from Patty. She's asking, what can we do to help schools and children in underserved communities?
Well, I mean, I think every school is different, every community is different. And so you have to start with, you know, that as the starting point. And then from there, you can build something that is powerful and meaningful, working from people's strengths. So, you know, I think that it's hard to answer that in the broadest sense, but I can say, you know, part of what Bank Street has always been about is trying to sort of use education to build a better society. And that means being engaged where kids need a great education most. And honestly, one thing that really disturbed me when I first came to Bank Street as president was how little we were doing in high poverty communities, how little we were doing in public schools. And that's not Bank Street's sort of long-term history. Over the years, there's been deep engagement, but that had lapsed in many ways in recent decades. And so there are always good things happening and good people trying to do that work, but it wasn't an institutional priority. And that is an institutional priority now. So we're looking for those opportunities.
Well, if I may, I'll jump in again on my horse. I think that people are finding right now that being outdoors is really important, and especially during this time, and that outdoor education, especially for us who are so concerned about the future of our children, there will be no future unless we do something about the world that we're polluting. And so I would urge you, I can't imagine there won't be more money now on outdoor education. And getting into the woods and getting into the parks and finding out why it's important to do that and why it's important in the psyches of our children to be in the outdoors. And I can't imagine that there won't be money now to improve our education in that range. So I would urge you to, I mean, am I being overly aggressive here? I hope not, because I think this is really, really probably the most important thing we can face right now, because there will be no future unless we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said, Marian.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to share thoughts from your context or questions? All right. Well, I think that's a good signal that we should close for the evening. I'm sure everyone's had a long day, and Zooming somehow is much more exhausting than talking in person. I'm not quite sure why, but it does drain one. Thank you for being here and for staying connected to Bank Street. And if you have ideas or projects or areas where you want to get involved, don't be shy about reaching out. Eric, do you want to say a few words before we close?
Yes, please. Thank you. So first, thank you, Shael, for providing a great conversation and dialogue. I definitely want to thank my colleagues, Michelle and Sari, for assisting with this event and coordinating this event. And of course, all of you for making the time to join another Zoom this evening and connecting with everybody tonight. I just want to mention a few of engagement opportunities that are coming up towards the end of this calendar year. The first thing is that if there are any of you that are interested in other programs, or other degrees, or really just want to know more information about what some of the programs are doing at the graduate school, there's a virtual graduate open house next week on the 19th. We'll share that on the chat box. This is another great way to kind of actually spread the word to your peers or to anybody that you may know that are working in schools and districts or any of the counties that would like to advance in their career. We also have our next Bank Street Alumni Association meeting on December 2nd. This is another great way for all of our alumni to come and connect with one another and hear what the advisory board and the officers are doing and helping kind of engage our alumni across the board, across the country. And we'll also hear from the Social Justice Committee and hear what the plans are for this year. That's another way to get involved as well in a more specific segment. And then I want to talk briefly about our Alumni Tutoring Network. It's one of our newest affinity groups. The next meeting for this group is on December 8th. And this is for anybody that's interested in starting a tutoring business, or if you already started that as a hobby and want to advance in more of a profession and would like to know more about marketing aspects or guidelines. Our communications team will be speaking at this meeting to this group on the 8th, and we'll have that in the chat box as well. If you have any questions or thoughts or any other feedback, as Shael mentioned, please do not hesitate to reach out. And of course, as you know, we are entering in the season of giving and giving back and being thankful. On the 1st of December is Giving Tuesday. And I know this is a time where many of our alumni and community members are very supportive and generous, and we would love all of our alumni to continue that generosity and loyal and support by giving back on this day. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Shael. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will share a link to this recording tomorrow or next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Lisa,